You guys have quite a schedule coming forward here. I saw in the newsletter. That's an ambitious schedule.
We're winter meetings too. Yeah, we
Well, when you put them all combined with the joint meetings.
well, it's all falling together. So normally we try to like spread them for January, but we always feel like we get people's convention. So people say, well, I'll try to do them earlier. And I was like, well, this is great because there's so many tons of topics anyway.
Yeah.
But now with all this, I'm like, wow, this is like kind of crazy. Like,
You may be tired looking at the
6
list.
weeks before Christmas. I'm like, oh no.
I thought it was quite ambitious.
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
Frank, that list made me tired.
Yeah.
It was
I thought, man, ooh,
And then when
I
I
don't
saw,
have to be there for all
when
that.
I saw the last page was all your winter meetings, and I thought, this isn't an addition, so I went back, okay, there's, those are
This
included in the list.
Yeah, thankfully.
Anyway.
Hey, I got it. And it's on your face, it's directly the.
Oh, good.
I mean,
There we
not
go.
that.
I mean, you know.
You want to be like straight to your face, but I think that makes it easier. I got it.
Good
Good
Hi.
morning.
Sorry, you've been taking much the,
Challenge?
yeah, I mean,
I'm there.
Doing our best.
I'm there every day.
we've had some backup plans. Yeah, so. Okay. Wow, I'm pumped.
Tries awfully hard.
Well, I just,
Usually when they argue that long. No. But, you know, some of that stuff. There's some truth in it. There's just watching us, there's some problems with this meeting, I'm gonna change their mind. Really thinking this. And if these 3 meetings might jeopardize the whole thing, it's a little bit far-fetched, but.
they've had to do it here.
Oh, yes. So.
Well, I just, for full disclosure, wants an audience with my board.
Good. None of this process is long and drawn out.
You're live, by the way.
They can hear what I'm going on there.
At this point now, yeah.
That's why I just texted it, yes. So.
At this point, the whole process.
Let me mute this.
The whole process is such that nothing gets secret. Everyone's gonna walk into this without open.
Yeah.
Anyone can talk to you.
Yeah, good.
Oh, it has to be in PowerPoint.
Yeah, hold on, let me.
On the other hand.
Just takes a second. Okay, so then I click it on. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be the same thing.
Because it was really live earlier.
Yeah, it was.
How do I get back? Ah! Okay, where, why is your thing? I got it, okay. So, just minimize it. Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, it's because it's in presenter mode. I think it's not, yeah, let's get it out of presenter mode. That's what I remember earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know which one. Okay, now we only have one.
You guys have one of those things? Oh, you don't? Okay.
Yeah.
I always carry one in my bag.
I try to keep it off now, so. Yeah, we're good. All I get to do is
Right.
stand up cute.
Oh, yeah. I don't have to look good for TV.
Okay, this might be 10 seconds, but I think that's pretty good. I'm not sure why it's showing like that. I'm gonna do a test and change the slide. Test and change slide. I didn't change. Picking you up. Oh, it's okay. What does that mean? Present to everyone. Maybe I need to click on that? Yeah. Oh, something's doing. I get what it's saying. That's a thing. Yeah. Okay, so let's try to change the slide again. I get what it's saying. That's a thing. Yeah. Let's try to change the I mean, you put it up, I put the, you know, I have the,
Yeah, but we didn't try to advance it.
I mean, you put it up. Yeah. That's not too. Oh, son of a gun. We
So I set them up with them. Yeah, I mean, it's good for us. Oh, we're gonna look at come back one range. But the ones that we write all the time.
Okay, so it works, it's not in presenter view as well. So it works. And it's too small.
But can you advance it with the clicker or not? When it's not.
My wife,
Yeah.
Alright, that's what it's gonna have to do.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting conundrums. We'll need to figure it out. Do you want us?
What about your last night? What we're doing. All right.
Oh, I see, just, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it's all good, you know, making good with that.
He's not very far away.
That's what I'm saying. Good, you did. That's good.
Right, yeah. You're
You're like, don't touch anything. Do you want me to? Yeah. Okay. Should prepare remarks. I give up. Yeah, we should go. We should go.
Everybody ready? Woo! Looking forward to this. Woo! Yeah. Kind of like staring at the ones still talking. Staring usually works. We need refreshments, coffee, donuts in the back, restrooms just out there. We're testing the live stream, so this is live. So if you're gonna yell something really crazy, think about it twice. A lot of people might be listening. But so today we're here to discuss the Quota Implementation Plan that the Producer Review Board discussed at length during 4 meetings earlier this summer and ending September 12th. And we have Rob Vandenholt from California Dairies Inc. that will go through the basics of what the quota plan is, why we need a quota plan, and basically what's the next step forward. And the 3 co-ops, as you recall, CDI and DFA and the Lakes were the original petitioner for a California federal bulk market order, and that's where everything started in February of 2015. And so really it's been over 2-year long process. It's not over yet, but it's a really big step that the industry has needed to make this opportunity potentially viable. So Rob, I'll let you start.
All right. For the folks on the live stream, do I need to stay on that side? Or is that close to
Just
the
act normal,
mic? Act normal?
right there.
Okay,
So-
in terms of microphone.
Yeah,
so
you're
you're
picking
okay?
it.
All right. Well, hey, good morning. Like I said, I'm Rob Vandenholt with California Dairies, and really have appreciated the opportunity to work with Western and Anya and Annie and setting this up along with Milk Producers Council and California Dairy Campaign. And then, of course, Land O'Lakes and DFA, who we've worked closely with since the beginning of the federal order process, and actually putting forth the proposal and the petition to USDA to see if a federal order could result in higher pay prices on the farm. And that process, of course, has been ongoing. We'll talk a little bit about just where that process stands. Got a fairly short presentation. We'll take you through, and we'll just go through it, and then Annie will come back up and moderate any kind of question and answers that we've got. And so if something doesn't make sense, though, that you see, feel free to stop me so I can make sure that as we go through these slides, what I'm saying actually makes sense. And for those in the back, you may want to come up here if you can't see these. It's a little tight, the words, so there's lots of seats if you wanted to do that. So for starters, why are we here? This federal order process has been going on for several years, but we are coming to the point now that we've got a couple of key decision points for dairy farmers in the state of California. The recommended decision came out in February. Final decision is expected to come out by the end of the year. That's our hope. So that would set us up for a producer vote at some point in 2018. If the producers decide to go towards a California federal order, it creates a fundamental math problem. We've got a quota program in the state dating back to when pooling came in 1969. And basically, at the end of the day, it's a $12 million a month obligation, roughly $12 million that is taken out of the California pool currently and used to pay and fund this quota premium every month. If we go to a federal order, that's ultimately what producers decide to do. California will no longer manage a California pool. Instead, it will be a federal order pool. It'll still be encompass milk produced here in California, and there's a whole lot of issues that we'll talk about in the future about what that pool looks like. But the bottom line is that pool cannot be used to fund a quota program. That was something the co-ops actually asked for the federal order to manage the quota program in a way that they could fund it. They said they can't do it for a variety of reasons. So how do we get that $12 million a month to fund the quota program if the state no longer has a pool to draw that out of? And that's really what the task was in this exercise here. And who was tasked with that was the Producer Review Board. And if I'm missing anybody, I apologize, but I don't think I see any members of the Producer Review Board here. This is who was on that committee, or on that board, and it was appointed by Secretary Ross, 15 members, and it's a pretty good cross-section of producers. I mean, you've got north to south, you've got co-op owners and non-co-op owners, you've got a couple of bottlers that are also dairy farmers here, and Ted DeGroat and Artie Young. You've got cheese manufacturers who are also producers here, Mike Gallo and Chuck Holland. You've got some organic farmers. So it's quite a cross-section of producers, made for some pretty interesting discussions. But ultimately, what they needed to do was come up with a set of recommendations on how do we fix this math problem? How do we get the $12 million a month we need to fund the quota program if the California pool can't do it anymore? So they met 4 times between May and September. They came together around a recommendation, and it was their set of how this program would be structured. The secretary and her staff put that into regulatory documents, which is what you have received now, or should have received in the mail, called the Quota Implementation Plan. And that is now being voted on between now and December 4th. So, you know, you've gotten a ballot. The mailer will include, if you haven't seen it yet, a ballot. That's pretty simple, yes or no. And then some verification, put your August milk production to verify that this is you. A letter that says, please get this in by December 4th. And the actual 12-page quota implementation plan. What I'm going to go through here in the next few slides is in bulleted form what's actually in that quota implementation plan, assuming that not everyone's going to read it word for word. So these are going through features of the program. For starters, on your farm, there's really no changes. Same quota premium would remain, $1.70 or 19.5 cents per pound of solid not fat. Regional quota adjusters, based on which county your dairy is, that we become familiar with, are still in place. You have to deliver grade A milk to a California milk plant. That is a requirement now to collect on quota, requires that going forward as well. Purchases or sales of your quota or buying quota would be managed by CDFA. They would have a role in administering those transactions. 24-month restriction. If you buy it, you can't sell it for 24 months, and vice versa, to eliminate short-term trading of quota are there, as well as the hardship requests. If you have a hardship, a reason that you should get an exception to this rule, the Producer Review Board could still hear that request under this quota implementation plan. And you've got to be an active grade A shipper. So every 60 days, you've got to sell at least some grade A milk to a California plant in order to collect on quota. So you can see nothing here is different from how the program operates today. When we talk about the funding piece, that's where things start to look a little different. The math is virtually the same, but it's how it shows up and how you see it is really what's different. So for starters, all grade A milk produced and processed in California would be subject to an assessment. Now, right now, essentially, everyone who's producing grade A milk that's pooled in the state of California is paying an indirect assessment to fund the quota program, because remember I said the $12 million a month pulled out of the pool is before you see what your overbase milk price is. So it's that overbase price is adjusted to incorporate that quota cost, but you don't see it. Under this program, if we went to a federal order and this QIP were approved, and this is now the structure of the quota program, you'd now see it. And that's really the biggest difference between how it operates today and how it would operate going forward. The assessment would be somewhere in the 36 to 38 cents a hundredweight range. That's a range that, and I'm going to explain here in a second why it's a range, why it's not a fixed figure. And I'll come back to the slide in just a second. But first, let me just talk about the same math, different. It shows up differently on your milk statement. What I mean by that, just to hammer that home, what we got today is, we'll call it behind the curtain. The numbers all happen before you ever see them. You get your overbase price here, and I guess I probably your overbase price is $16 a hundredweight. That's after the quota dollars have already been taken out. So you haven't seen it, but those dollars have already been removed. So obviously there's no need to have a quota assessment. You've got your $16 net overbase price, and the quota is going to add $1.43 to $1.70 per hundredweight on top of that based on your RQA. What we're talking about with the quota implementation plan is, unofficially call it in front of the curtain. Now all the numbers are very visible. You're not going to have an overbase price that already takes the money out for the quota. Instead, you're going to see a blend price, where you're going to see whatever contract price you've got under that system. There's going to be a quota assessment then on top of that, or deducted from that. What you see is exactly the same as what you would see today as a net price. It's just you actually saw the math. You saw it on the top line. That money wasn't deducted out of the top line. Then the second line, it's deducted out of there. And what you're left with is the same $16 in this example as you were left with in the current system. And again, the RQA adds, or the quota adds $1.43 to $1.70. So the math is functionally the same. It just shows up differently. And when I talked about 36 to 38 cents, the reason for that range is because the quota payment is largely uniform month to month. Different number of days in each month. Who's holding the quota, the RQA might be different from month to month, but largely the same. And so look at here with the spring flush, this is an example, April of 2017, $11.4 million quota cost to fund that quota premium versus August, 11.8 million. Pretty much the same, it's just there's an extra day in August. So you got a slight about $400,000 additional cost because it's one more day of quota payments. But the milk that you're spreading that cost, spreading out that cost along is smaller. You've got 3.3 billion pounds in April, 3.1 billion pounds in August. You're spreading that same cost over less milk, which is why in the springtime, you may only need 34 cents and change to actually collect the money you need for the quota program. Whereas in the summer, you may need 37.5 cents because there's the same cost spread out over less milk. And so when I talk about, in this slide, 36 to 38 cents, that is a range based on where we are as an industry. Now, there are also trend issues. You know, we have 39 billion and change milk, pounds of milk produced last year of grade A milk, and when we had 42 billion pounds a few years ago, you're obviously spreading that cost out over more milk. And so less milk, whether it's because of seasonality or because of trends, could change what this assessment is. But given where we're at right now, 36 to 38 cents is what that assessment would estimate it to be. How often the secretary were to change it, I believe where the quota implementation plan, if you read in there, leaves a little bit of flexibility in how often they change it, but they're only going to collect, CDFA, what is actually needed to fund the quota program, the 36 to 38 cents, based on the numbers I showed you. Grade B milk. This was an issue that was talked about in the PRB. Grade B milk does not participate in the quota program today. Grade B milk would not participate in the quota program under this program. There are legal reasons why it doesn't participate today. It doesn't participate today because the California law actually says that it's funded by the pool, and the pool is only made up of grade A milk. So obviously they don't participate in the funding, they therefore also don't participate in receiving the payments for quota, or being able to own and collect on quota. That would continue to be the case going forward under this QIP, given current law in California. Same thing for milk that is produced in California, even if grade A, but sold outside of California. That doesn't participate in the California quota program because it doesn't participate in the California pool. There's legal restrictions, federal law that restricts, or constitutional law that restricts out-of-state milk from participating. That would also continue to be the case under this. So effectively, with the exception of a very small amount of milk that's currently being sold as grade A non-pool that technically is exempt from the quota program today and would not be exempt under this QIP. Other than that one small exception, this all functionally is exactly the way it operates today, just it looks differently on the milk. So hopefully that all made sense. It's a long way of saying it's largely the same as today, just with a different look, but I wanted to dig into the numbers a little bit more. Producer handlers. I don't know if this directly impacts anybody in the room, but there are 4 producer handlers in the state of California that have a historic exemption from pool obligations on the volume of their milk. Up here, it's Foster's Dairy and Producer's Dairy in Fresno, and down south, it's Hollandia Dairy in Rockville. You had You had two of these, Hollandia and Rockview had owners of theirs on this PRB committee. So it made for some pretty interesting discussion. If you go back to how the producer handler exemption was created in 1968, 69, when pooling came in, the state issued quota to those who had Class 1 sales at the time. But these dairies who had Class 1 sales, but actually took the next step of distributing it themselves through, cash and carry type handler operations, they, rather than getting quota, they got this exemption on a volume of milk. And there's been a couple of opportunities to grow that exemption, but largely they got it back in 1969. What the law says is if they ever lose that exemption, they get whatever quota they would have gotten back in when the start of pooling occurred. And that's really where the PRB ended. There's a lot of debate over whether they should get more. The law doesn't allow them to get more as currently written. And so what those four families are going to get is the volume of quota that they would have gotten in 1969, plus whatever pool quota they purchased since then. So that's cool as well. So this was quite a bit of drama, but at the end of the day, just following the law and what has happened to other producer handlers that have lost that exemption over the years. I want to talk about two levels of review for the program. These generate a little bit of discussion in the PRB meetings. The first is already in current law. You might not even realize it, but if 25% or more of the producers in California wanted to petition the secretary to get rid of quota and pooling, that petition would be sent to the secretary, and he or she, depending on who the secretary is, would consider that, could take action on some sort of a hearing or something. And if the secretary wanted to make a change to the quota program as a result of that, or terminate the program, it would go to a referendum vote of producers. So ultimately, nothing would happen absent a referendum vote of producers. But this opportunity to review the program exists in current law and was embedded into the Quota Implementation Plan as well going forward. The second level of review is new. This is something that the secretary and her staff were pushing for in the PRB meetings as a result of the fact that now quota is going to be a line item, be very visible. It's a pretty significant transfer of $12 million out of some checks and into others based on who owns quota. And so one of the things that the secretary wanted was a level of an opportunity for producers to provide feedback on the program. Are there things that maybe should be looked at about the program that need change? Are the RQAs at an appropriate level? Are the assessments, are they being taken out at the appropriate frequency and changed at the appropriate frequency? And there's all kinds of things you could look at with a program like this. But bottom line, she wanted some opportunity for producers to provide that feedback to the department and to the producer review board for further review. And so what was included in this QIP is every 5 years a survey would be done of all California producers. How's the program working? Are there things that ought to be addressed? Should the program continue? Could be part of it, but it's only part. They're very clear that the survey needs to encompass how it's operated and how it's administered. And so the results of that survey would be reviewed by the producer review board, that 15-member group. That may not be the same 15 people, but that producer-appointed group. And if they wanted to do anything with those survey results, they could make recommendations to the secretary. Secretary can make a decision of whether they want to make recommended changes to the industry. But again, any significant modifications to quota coming out of this process are subject to a producer vote. So the bottom line is nothing happens to the quota program in terms of changing it or even talking about terminating the program absent this producer referendum. You could change the underlying law in California, I guess, technically, but that, really, unless the legislature were to take that move, producers are the ones that decide the future of the California quota program under our current system or under this QIP. Now, we talked about the votes. This is how the law says those votes will be held. No matter whether it's this vote that you're currently undertaking or a future vote on these recommendations coming out of the PRB or the survey, these are the thresholds that you have to meet. First, you need a quorum, essentially. At least 51% or more of the ballots that go out have to be returned with either a yes or a no vote. You might be surprised to see only 1,054 ballots that went out. Now, some of that is the fact that our industry has been shrinking, but it's also in how CDFA counts a producer. CDFA considers a producer a taxable entity that owns a dairy facility. It could be a sole proprietorship, a partnership, corporation, LLC, LLP, whatever. But if you are one taxable entity that owns multiple facilities, you're going to get one ballot. If you file a tax return for multiple facilities, so you've got a sole proprietorship, you also got a partnership, or you set up separate corporations, each having their own dairy, and you file a tax return for each corporation, they would consider that each one of those one producer. But that's why out of the 1,300 or so facilities out there, only 1,054 ballots were sent out. Because you've got based on their definition of a producer. So we need about 540 votes to come back in, yes or no. Once you've got at least 540 votes that have been returned, now you look at how many of them are yes versus no. The most likely scenario to get to a yes would be 65% of those votes that come in are a yes, as long as they represent at least half the milk, or at least 51% of the milk that was voted. You could theoretically have a lower threshold, have less than 65% of the ballots come in as a yes, if it represented at least 65% of the milk. But that would assume it's a whole lot of very large dairy farmers that are voting yes, versus small dairy farmers that are on the no side. So I think the most likely scenario is we got to look at basically 2/3 of the ballots that come back need to be a yes vote in order for this to pass. That's kind of the number that we're looking at. So you need at least 540 votes to come in, and whatever volume of votes above that you get, 2/3 of those need to be yes. Really confidence you got a yes vote. So why are we here? Part of the reason is to educate and make sure folks know why it is that you're being asked to vote on this and some of the history. The other part is all 6 organizations have come together to say, we think that this is a program that is worthy of a yes vote for producers. And we're asking all of our collective members to strongly consider a yes vote. Why? Part of the reason is this has been a long-standing commitment to have a quota, a path forward for quota under a California federal order. And since the very beginning, when the cooperatives started drafting the initial petition into that we would be submitted to USDA, a key commitment was we need to have a path forward for California's quota program. It's a $1.2 billion asset on dairy farmers' balance sheets. It's an important program to many producers in the state of California. And so trying to have a battle over quota, which there has been those battles before, producer versus producer discussions, and trying to have that battle on the federal order made it more and more likely that you wouldn't end up with change in either area, and you'd end up with a status quo. And so to eliminate that, we said, we're just going to put our stake in the ground that we need to find a path forward for quota. And that involved going to Congress and getting a language in the farm bill to that we felt strengthened our case in a California federal order to have a quota program. And when USDA wouldn't run it for us as part of a federal order, it meant going to the department and finding a way, the CDFA, and finding a way to continue it at the state level. This quota implementation plan is the accommodation of that commitment. It's the way to fulfill that commitment. And so there's really no downside to a yes vote. A yes vote means that if we go into a federal order, we've got a path forward and we follow that commitment. If we never go into a federal order, at the end of the day, if the producers decide that's not a direction we want to go, and the time comes next year, this QIP doesn't have any impact. It never goes into effect unless you actually go into a federal order. And so that's why a yes vote is not only, there's no downside, but it's also an important piece of continuing this conversation. If we don't have a yes vote, we really don't have a great option to go look at a federal order next year. Because the 3 co-ops have made it such a priority. As you know, I think the trade associations have embraced that commitment, given the importance of quota to our industry, that we really need a QIP in place to realistically consider the federal order next year. So these are all the reasons why we think a yes is really important, to have that QIP in place. That if it ends up on the shelf forever because we don't go to a federal order, then that's an industry decision that will be made down the road. But for today, it preserves that discussion about a federal order and gives us that option down the road. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'd invite Annie back up. Go ahead and put it on to the next section of the meeting.
So I guess, thank you, Rob, that was very informative, and you should get here if you want. I guess now we're just gonna be, opening up, taking questions, comments, share your excitement of all this. So the dark in here, but I see everybody looks pretty awake, so that's great job, thank you very much. So, anything, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for going through that at length. And I think it's one other thing to mention, which I know you said as well, is that the Quota Implementation Plan that was put together by the Producer Review Board was very open, transparent, participatory. There were 4 public meetings that anyone could attend and listen in on or comment on at any point, as well as an open comment period for the public to weigh in on these issues. So I think that's really key as people look at their ballots and decide how to vote here, is that the process was really good, I think, in getting us there. And then also, as you mentioned, you know, it's a producer asset, and in those meetings at every turn, those Producer Review Board members looked at what's best for producers, and they weighed both quota and non-quota holders alike. So I was just personally very impressed by the process that led to this point. And again, something that we've known is that CDFA has been running this program since it began, and now CDFA would, under this quota implementation program, play a key role in continuing the program in the federal order. So again, that's why our organization thinks it's really important for California dairy producers to vote yes, so they have the option next year of determining the federal order and that discussion. So thanks for your presentation. We really appreciate it. But again, the process leading up to this, I think, has been great.
Thanks, Rob. Good job. Could you expand on how that assessment might fluctuate? So you talked about the amount of milk, time of the year, days of the month. Do you guys foresee any additional milk going to grade B to avoid that assessment?
This is something that the Producer Review Board talks at length about. Does this create an opportunity for milk to go grade B and escape that 38 cents? Right now, technically, that grade B milk is not participating, and they're escaping funding the quota program right now. It's more of a transparency issue now that they would eliminate an actual line item on their check. Talking amongst the other stakeholders, and I'm giving one perspective, and I would invite any of the others to stand up. I think it's something we need to look at, continue to look at. It was not something that could be addressed in short order for this process. I think there's some factors that probably limit how much grade B milk there actually is, because it can't go to anybody. It's got to be specific, someone who can accept grade B milk on a year-round basis. And then it's also, a lot of times the grade B discussion is based on other market economics. Do they think the class 4B or cheese milk price is going to be higher than the over-base price, and therefore they're trying to capture that. So there's other things. We ought to have a more at-length discussion in the years to come, but certainly it's something that just because it's not included in here, because that's not part of the quota program, doesn't mean we're not going to take a look at it as an industry going forward. But yes, so.
Yeah, Frank, I would just add, on behalf of Atlanta Lakes, we don't allow members to go grade B in our milk, and I think some of the other co-ops are in similar situations. So we represent somewhere between 75 and 80% of the milk in the state. What we're talking about here is proprietary handlers, like, Hilmar, and maybe some direct shippers to Saputo and it would be very difficult for all that milk to go grade B. So you're going to have, roughly speaking, 80% of that milk on the high end as part of the assessment pool that's going to go on as far as quota funding. So I just leave you with that. Rob's right. There's potential there, and we'll have to keep our eye on that as we move forward.
Thanks.
Rob, what percent, and I just asked that, what total percent of the milk produced in California today is good?
It's about a little shorter than 3 million pounds a day out of 110 million pounds a day. So
2.6%.
2.6%. the economist knows that it's 2.6%. I just.
2.6?
Yeah.
It changed, it changed with, from year to year, because they elect for the first year whether they go grade B, for the next year. So we don't know what the percentage would be in 2018, but right now
It's been higher than this before, it's been lower than this before.
That's only when the inspector puts you on.
And actually through this process, I mean, the PRB really got into detail. They actually broke it down into the dairies that have always been grade B, of which there are some 15 or so smaller dairies, and then what you call maybe the more opportunistic grade B opportunities, where they were a grade A dairy and decided to opt to be grade B for the next year. And that amount has grown some in the last few years. Part of that, though, or the biggest part of that, is just the difference between the classes. And grade B over the past 12 months has trended higher than the 4A price. And so by going grade B, you get to capture some of that money rather than sharing it with the pool. So there's other factors at play. But I think to Frank's point, we want to make sure we're not creating a new reason to go grade B. And so that's why we need to watch it very closely.
Okay, the question, another one. I ship to Crystal. Okay. What if Crystal refuses?
So that was a big reason why this PRB needed to structure a program specific to California's needs, because the whole issue of depooling or pooling in a federal order is different. We haven't nailed down exactly what the pooling rules would be in a California federal order. That's what we'll learn when the final decision comes out, what we're voting on. But every other federal order in the country has some depooling provisions. And so what was structured here in the QIP, the Quota Implementation Plan, is the quota program would operate in a bubble completely separate from whatever decisions a handler makes on pooling or not pooling in a federal order. Whatever those rules are in a federal order in California, if we go that direction, this QIP is going to assess all grade A milk produced and processed in California, regardless of whether you sell to a handler. Crystal probably would be pooled because they're class 1, but even if you sold to a cheese plant that opted not to be pooled and the federal order allowed that, you still, if you're grade A milk to a California plant, you participate in the quota program under this proposal. It's a completely separate discussions. Class 1 handler. And no federal order can class 1 handler be pooled. But not knowing exactly how the California rules would be written, regardless of whether your milk was pooled or not pooled in the federal order. If it's grade A milk going to a California plant, you're paying into the quota program, you also can own and collect on store. Don't lose that grade A permit. No.
anything else.
Right.
Oh,
I want to be the,
you leave the silence and I'll frankly.
yeah, that's right. You know, you can count on me for at least a few questions. So this, you said there's no downside to a yes vote. And I'm not going to argue that point, but the individual dairyman does get to vote in this referendum and might not for a federal order.
Yeah, this vote is producer by producer, no block voting. Block voting is allowed under the federal order system. No, I don't think any of the three co-ops have determined or announced what they're going to do. I can only speak on behalf of CDI. Our board wants to see the final decision, have a chance to talk to our membership before making that decision. But you're right that the voting structure is different. The no downside is more of a reference to a yes doesn't actually do anything unless a federal order comes in place. That's a point taken on the voting population. Of course, I would say that the co-op, regardless of which co-op it is voting on behalf of its producers, and it's a producer board, but whether each producer gets its own individual federal order ballot is an unanswered question.
I would hope the co-op would survey its membership if they are going to block vote. Personally, I would like to see the individual vote, but at least a survey of their membership.
behalf of the Milk and Salt CDI, I will convey that to the board.
Duly noted.
And, there we go. So you got all your milk covered here. We're delivering that message.
So I think you mentioned the number, I think it's 540 ballots, right, that need to be returned, for this to even be considered, doesn't need to be yes. Just 540 ballots need to be returned, 538, I think, need to be returned, before we even start looking at the threshold. And so, it's a, you know, it doesn't seem like a big number, but sometimes you get stuff in the mail and you forget about it. So the deadline is December 4th. There's still some time to think about it, but if you made up your mind, might as well send it in. And so based on the 65% threshold that Rob mentioning, that means that we need 350 yes vote. So, yeah, you get the 60%, 65% of producer, the safest one, you know. But so, you know, those are still, doesn't seem like a big number, but it's still a lot of ballots to be returned. So I think we covered, you know, everything else, so.
Yeah, and I just think it's important for dairy producers to talk to other dairy producers about these issues. And then I know the invitation for this meeting included everyone's email and contact information to call, email, whatever dairy producers might need, like more information about their decisions on how to vote. But it's important for everyone to be talking about this until the ballot comes over and forth.
Yeah, I agree. We've held, I know Western's had some area meetings. I've had some area meetings as well, CDI. I'm sure the others have had communication with their members. It's been really positive feedback. I mean, I think if the people who were showing up at meetings are the only ones voting, I'd be very, you know, if it weren't for that threshold of being 51%, I'd be very confident. What I'm concerned about are the producers who aren't here today or who aren't going to come to a meeting. And so that's where you all, as producers, have an opportunity at the coffee shop, to see folks around town, to make sure that we all are ambassadors for this. If you feel strongly that this is something we need in order to continue this conversation about a federal order and whether that's the direction we want to at least have the option of next year. That's going to be important communication because not everyone's going to show up at this meeting. I think there's more dairymen in Modesto than came here today. So it's going to be that outreach. Which Annie, and Anya, and Kevin, and Pete, and Francis, and Lynn we'll all do. But when it comes from a producer, it means a little bit more to it. And so carrying that message to your to the dairyman you come in contact with, and the importance of getting this vote in, the importance of the yes vote, much appreciated.
And TDFA has the ability to release the names of those who have and have not voted. They're not going to say which way you voted, but they have the ability to actually say, this is the list of people who have not voted. I don't think it's meant as public shaming. It's more just to, you know, get the industry a feel for how far or how close we are to the 51% threshold, but they do have that ability. So if it gets close, industry might request to see where we're at with that. So just as long as you see your name on lists and you haven't voted, then you're not, you know, they're allowed to do that. So.
Can you legally do that?
It's in the law
Yeah.
that they can.
They can't say which way you voted. They just can't say whether you voted or not. And I, you know, people will not be for it.
So that 51% is the quorum?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the percentage is counted off of that, those who voted. Okay.
Who's voting yes? I want hands. I want to see the nom. Voting is a very private matter, but if you don't vote yes, I'm very disappointed. I've worked a long time and hard to get to this point.
Yeah, but my neighbor didn't,
Yeah.
but he's a Stuyve couple.
You know what?
Stuyve couple.
Hard-headed. Hard-headed. I've never been to the motherland. So I don't think you're there. All right. Well, I want to thank Annie and Anya. They put a lot of time and effort and resources into putting this all together. So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to speak and appreciate the participation in this one.
Thank you.
There's 10 on it. It's more than expected. That's good.
Yeah.
Freaked out.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, yeah. So 9 years. Bye.